Welcome to episode 122 of Closer Mentality. I'm your host, Julia Mellett. As much as I love sharing the stories of elite athletes, I've found that some of the most unique episodes of this podcast have bloomed from the sidelines, specifically from the mouths and minds of sports psychologists. Today's guest's bio caught my attention for a couple of reasons, and I'm so excited to have Dr. Seth Swary on this week's episode. Swary, the youngest of two boys growing up in rural Ohio, played every sport he could find: soccer, baseball, basketball, track and field, football.
Towards the end of high school was where I was kind of up in the air between football and baseball. I think I liked baseball more, but had more opportunity through football. And so then kind of ended up leaning that way. The recruitment process was pretty laid back for me. I went to a really small school and ended up going to D3 for college. So there were really only a handful of schools that I was really even talking to. I had some that reached out, but mostly for me too, I wasn't sure if I wanted to play a sport in college, just because I knew what a huge commitment it was going to be. I was like, I don't even know. I struggled a lot with my confidence in sports. And so I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to be good enough to get there. Is this going to be a waste of time kind of thing? But my older brother, he was a year ahead of me in school, had just gone to a college at Ohio Wesleyan University, and he was playing football there. And so they started recruiting me. And so I was like, well, that's kind of cool that I could keep playing with my brother. That's kind of fun. And then I was able to get a really good academic scholarship from the school. So it was just kind of worked out that it was it's a cool opportunity to keep playing. It's an opportunity to play with my brother, and financially worked out really well because of the academic scholarship. So I'm sort of a stars aligning moment a little bit, and ended up going there. But the recruitment process for me was really nothing too crazy or overwhelming. It was mostly just a handful of schools. I'm kind of debating, whether I even wanted to try to go play or not.
The younger Swary, forever feeling like the shadow following his older brother Tyler, struggled with identity issues, but college allowed a space to be himself.
I spent my whole life really trying to differentiate myself from him, and we are very different anyway. Very, very different people. We don't really look that much alike. Like I said, people didn't believe me when I said no, Tyler's my brother, that one. So and I grew up in a really small town, 40 kids in my graduating class. So all my teachers were calling me Tyler through my whole life, on accident, because they had him the year before and then were having me. So they were just so used to saying that. So I was constantly called his name. So growing up, there was kind of a lot of that for me already anyway. But going to college kind of felt different for me because he had been gone for a year. I knew it was just a different avenue in the sense that he was going into education, so his major was different than mine. I knew we were not going to have any classes together. I think we only had one or two classes even that we took overlap, never at the same time. But I can remember one professor who was oh, I recognize that name. I was like, yeah, I think you had my brother a year or two ago. So I had already been doing it anyway, spending my life kind of differentiating myself. But going into college, I think that was a big sort of emphasis for me, was kind of making my own path and kind of making my own identity. But it was sort of easy because I knew I would have a lot of differentiation just from going to different classes and being around different people a little bit. But we still ended up kind of in the same orbits sort of naturally. So yeah, I think really understanding that I didn't have to follow him, and whatever he was doing was that's great for you. You live your life, you do your thing. We played different positions, so we were even in practice, we weren't really overlapping that much. So we were able to kind of maintain our lives separately, but overlap when and where we wanted to.
A tight-knit family and an older brother paving the way initially worked against Swary's independence, as he didn't feel the sense of individuality he had anticipated. It took time to find a community for himself on the small campus of Ohio Wesleyan. Once Swary found neuroscience and psychology, though, he bloomed.
So I started with neuroscience, and that was because I when I first was going into college, I wanted to go to med school. I thought like working in a hospital, being a doctor, that was like, I gotta go do that. That's my path. But I didn't want to do like bio or chem. I didn't want like a pre-med, and the college had like recently started the neuroscience major, and I was like, "Ooh, that sounds kind of cool," because then I can do like I was kind of interested in psych, didn't know much about it, but I was like, this feels like a happy medium that would be great for getting into med school, but also not sort of just your kind of typical bio or chem. And then through my neuroscience major, I had to take like 5 psych classes anyway. So through my neuroscience major, I automatically qualified for a psych minor. And I was like, I mean, if I take an extra, like, I think it was like 2 or 3 classes to get a major, and I was like, well, that would look even better for me. And I like psych, so why not? So it was kind of just like that. It was that I was close to a major with my neuroscience degree already, and I thought it would like look better, but also I was interested in it. So it was kind of a win-win for me that I get to pick up a few more classes in psych. So I got to take a few other classes that I was like, I'm interested in, but weren't required for my neuroscience degree. So I took like a child psych class. I took like a psychopharmacology class, like some other classes that were just a little bit outside that were really interesting and really cool. And I was super excited to do it. So yeah, a little bit because I was interested and a little bit because of, how it would look on a resume.
An injury that sidelined him sophomore year then opened Swary's eyes to the sports psychology field, effectively redefining his career path.
So my sophomore year of college, I got hit in a game and shattered my collarbone and tore all the ligaments in my shoulder. So after surgery, I became really close with my athletic trainer because we're spending a whole lot of time together. Because it was really early in the season too, so I'm at practice. Just like she helped make me like I was like an athletic training intern, so I got to do like a work study. She was the best. Shout out to Julie, I still love her. And so she actually gave me a referral for a sports psychologist that was working at Ohio State at the time. And I remember being like, oh, like a sports psychologist, like that's kind of cool. I'm a 19-year-old football player so of course I don't need it, right? I'm too tough. And now I look back, well, you idiot, right? But that was kind of my first introduction to like, oh, there's a specialization within psych with sports. Like I didn't know that was a thing. I'm like, that sounds kind of cool. And so it was then towards my senior year where I really started looking into post-grad. At that point, I knew I didn't want to work in a hospital. I knew med school was not going to be the route for me. I worked in a hospital in undergrad, in a surgery department, and it was really cool, like incredible experience, but also helped me realize like, I do not want to be in a hospital. I don't want to, be in this setting, just like not for me. And the way a lot of sports psych classes and programs and stuff are still kind of split. Either they're in psych or under kinesiology. And so we had a sports psych class that was not in psych, it was in kinesiology. And so I found that out my senior year. It was called like mental aspects of sport performance. So they kind of like hid it underneath this like other title in our kinesiology department. And so I took that my senior year, and that's when I was like, this is really interesting. Like I like this a lot. And so from there, I was like, well, maybe going into sports psych would be cool. And I started looking into programs and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna give this a try. So probably halfway through my senior year was when I decided I wanted to go to grad school and started like really trying to find a program. And so got lucky enough to get into the University of Denver over the summer and went from there.
The University of Denver is widely renowned as one of the best sports psychology master's programs, and Swary excelled in the classroom. He had narrowed the scope of his research to youth sport, but it wasn't until pursuing his PhD at West Virginia University that he found the intersection of music and sport performance.
I was more of like interested in working with like youth athletes, kind of seeing development and like skill development through sport. And it wasn't until being in West Virginia when the connection with like music in sport came up for me. And that was through more of my research was kind of shifting towards emotion regulation in sport. And I played baseball growing up. Like I loved the idea of like walk-up songs and stuff. And uh, well, our team, every football game, like our speakers were blasting, even practice, like music was blasting all the time, everywhere. And so as I was doing, working with some athletes, I was trying to come up with some new session topics. And one of them, we were kind of talking about like emotion regulation. I was like, how can I kind of get them thinking about identifying emotions and sort of their emotional reactions? So I was like trying to design a session and I wanted them thinking more about how they can identify their own emotional reactions and some of the physical reactions that happen. And I was like, well, maybe like I could play them different songs and get them to, because I knew like songs might elicit emotions. And so like it was me kind of randomly stumbling into stuff, I swear. That I was like, oh, that could be cool. And then going like this session was really fun to run, and like it was fun. I made them like a little worksheet where I made this like playlist of songs, played them a little bit of the song, so they had to listen and then kind of write down like, well, what kind of emotions like came up for you? What do you think sort of is meant to be portrayed in this song? Just to get them trying to like expand emotional vocabulary a little bit as well. But it was really fun to like get to run through some of that stuff, see them like kind of react to like music playing. And it led to some stronger relationships, I think, with some of the athletes, because then they would like ask me about certain songs, or they'd be like, oh, I love that song, right? It elicits a lot of memories and stuff as well for them. And so from that, I was like, this would be a cool area to study. And I did not get my PhD because I wanted to do research. I very much went the doctorate route because I wanted to learn how to do research so I could use it better in my applied work. So I was never really like super excited to do research. So I was like, if I'm going to do research, it's got to be something that like I'm really interested in and like excited about. So after doing that, it was kind of around the time where I was exploring topics for like my dissertation and stuff. And I was like, this could be really cool. Emotion regulation was where I was already kind of compiling info. I was like, this would be a great like kind of next step. And there's not a ton of research on it. There's like bits, but from what's been done too, I mean, the experience with music for athletes is so different now than 10 years ago, because now you have Spotify, you have the Apple Music, you can make your own playlist, you have unlimited, hours, you can listen on your phone on the way to the bus, you can have your headphones in, there's just so much more personalization with your music. Whereas, when I was in football, like we had like Pandora radio. The best we could get was like, you could skip the ads. But like you couldn't like pick which songs you were listening to most of the time. It was just like you could maybe get a personalized radio station, but like you couldn't just pick your songs or make a playlist really in the same way. So a lot of the coaches didn't really get how big of a role that music was playing in their athletes' lives now compared to like them growing up, right? Again, it's like maybe somebody had a speaker, they were like putting CDs and stuff in, but now it's like someone hooks up to the Bluetooth and they have a playlist made and they're just like picking music. It's like such a different experience. So I was like, this is something I think would be really cool. It's pretty open in terms of research, and it's such a big role in athletes' sport experience that I think it would be really impactful to do that would help me with my applied work as well.
Swary's research is some of the initial aggregation work in the space, and his dissertation has been built upon by sport research across the world. Swary 2020 found that as it relates to emotional regulation, music integration in sport plays off the eyes-off model, which posits that athletes emotionally regulate to facilitate positive outcomes, more so than positive moods. Swary's work sought to define the impact of emotion regulation strategies in individual and team-centric sport atmospheres, specifically in pre-performance routines, such as pre-game playlists and walk-up songs. Swary's research subjects, 9 professional baseball players between ages 19 and 26, were selected due to the inherent weaving of music throughout a full game day, as well as the variety of cultural backgrounds that the sport unites. Swary's research also divided the impact of listening into 3 distinct phases: individual listening, team listening, and stadium music. Individual listening allowed players to exercise autonomy in their music choices, effectively creating freedom to seek specific songs which served specific purposes. This music selection was partially informed by a player's mood, with some calling their pregame playlists, quote, background noise or distraction, while others created more structured, intentional playlists to increase or decrease energy and arousal. Individual players even stated that their pregame playlists were not only structured in genre, but furthermore were organized in a way such that the energy built or waned as game time crept closer. One player even ended his playlist definitively with 7-minute-long Through the Fire and Flames by metal band Dragon Force, citing its use as a definitive bookend to his pregame process. These players were effectively using music as emotional regulation without realizing. Swary gave a nod to the impact of classical conditioning in his study, saying that players can absolutely Pavlov themselves into and out of anxiety with the right music selection. A 2007 Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology study, spearheaded by Kostas Karageorgis, was referenced numerous times by Swary, as its use of music on youth sport athlete mental activation set the stage for Swary's additions. Karageorgis' research sought to define the impact of music on pre-performance routines. The findings, skewed toward youth sport, defined mood-related listening as being precipitated by 5 broad categories: appropriate mental focus, confidence, positive emotional state, psyched up, and relaxed. The focus on mood listening in this study cast a broader view on less competitive metrics for emotional regulation than Swary's research.
I think where, again, a lot of athletes kind of end up using music in an unhelpful way is we all sort of have this idea that I'm supposed to listen to pump up music before I go perform. But I use eyes off a lot with people and sort of where they're functioning at their best. And for not everyone, like, you're not going to be at a 10. You don't want to be at a 10. You're not going to play your best at a 10. You're like a little bit too activated. And so the problem a lot of athletes run into is like they're feeling anxious and then they're listening to music that's got really high beats per minute. And it's like this pump up song. They're just like adding to their sort of activation level, which is not what we want. So I think you probably could sort of condition yourself out of anxiety responses by pairing the experience with a lower beats per minute, like calming, relaxing song, rather than when we sort of get conditioned to feel more anxious because we're about to go play. You can kind of pair that experience with hopefully an opposite experience where you kind of like, if you're able to just like be in your locker and put your headphones in and listen to. So the beats per minute really is the biggest piece. And so you want to go for like beats per minute and your sort of experience and reaction to the song. So pairing that ahead of time, I think probably would help condition yourself out, which would be great.
Building on that, one pitcher expressed that rap music specifically put him on edge and created an atmosphere where he catastrophized bad pitches and increased his frustration. He combated that emotional distress with songs featuring lower beats per minute.
So it more so depends on how you actually use your music. For some people, they'll use it for like emotion regulation. So they might want to use it ahead of time, have more like low beats per minute songs early on, and then later on, right, pick up the beats per minute, start to get the heart rate up a little bit. But for others, it's more of like a group cohesion sort of experience. So having music on like on the speaker, you're like kind of hanging out with your teammates and you got music on there. So it's a cool way of like kind of getting on the same page, getting to know each other, like having a shared experience. So there's no like right amount, I would say. But what is important is not getting too stuck on like it has to be certain songs or it's got to be like a specific amount or a specific um, playlist. It's more about kind of matching mood and thinking more about beats per minute. So kind of making sure that we're ramping up when we need to ramp up and keeping it sort of calm, low uh, energy until we need to go up.
From a team perspective, Swary's research found that in settings like weight rooms and locker rooms, where emotions are generally high, specific players are peer-selected as playlist suppliers. These players, who Swary said are not always the captains or even team leaders, have effectively created a role and fulfilling identity for themselves within the larger team atmosphere.
Through the research that I've done, and then as a result, like talking to people about it, it's funny, everyone will talk about like there's usually one or two people on the team that are sort of like the music person that like when they get there, their phone goes on the aux or they get connected to the Bluetooth. Like even if someone else is already connected, like they kind of take over, whether it's somebody sort of older in the team or, but usually it's somebody that like has the widest taste in music, like the most varied taste. So they end up playing a wider variety of music. And I think that's really the biggest thing is like the more variety you have, the more likely you are to hit kind of everyone's interests, at least a little bit. And if you have some music that draws some people in, they're more likely then to kind of be interested in the other music that you play. So it's a way of kind of bringing everyone together. But I think because of that, you have to cast a pretty wide net. So the person playing the music has to be able to kind of like understand the vibe of the room a little bit and be able to play music from different genres, different like sort of beats per minute, and be able to kind of see how they're catching, the group. But that variability is huge because if you just sort of stick to one genre, there's going to be at least a chunk of people who aren't going to be really that interested or are going to kind of like tune out because there's not much there that's connecting with them. It's like a special role. I would say probably more often than not, it's not the captain that ends up in that role. Like usually it's kind of more of like, I think of leadership in a couple of different ways, and one being sort of like social leadership. The person that's kind of like brings the group together and plays more of that role with like relationship focused. I feel like that person who's more visible on the team, but is maybe more like relationship focused, they tend to be in that role. But it's usually like a very distinct role. Like there's like one or two people who everyone kind of like defaults to. And it's really funny to see like any team you go to, like you can ask like, who plays the music and they'll be able to, name names right away. But that role is pretty distinct from the captain.
In team atmospheres, song BPMs were organized to grow arousal and manipulate emotions gradually. Electric atmospheres built from the later songs, music above 120 beats per minute, serving to pump the entire team up, regardless of their personal interests in the songs and genres. Players also noted in Swary's research that, although not every song and group scenarios suited their tastes, diversity also allowed for unique team chemistry checks. Playlists built by conglomerating a team's worth of individual favorite songs opened the door for team building.
Probably the most interesting thing, I had a few guys talk about how the music before games was a way of getting to know each other. So like culturally was one way that people talked about, like some of the guys that were from the US or from more like rural areas, they're like, I mostly listen to like country or rock growing up. And then, I've got guys playing like rap. And so like, I'll be like, oh, like what's this song? And so then you're talking to people about like this song, and then sort of through their music interests, you get to know about their backgrounds. They're like, obviously there's a lot of like guys from the Dominican and that listen to more like Latin music. And so they're like, I don't know what's going on in this song, but I see them getting excited. And then like, I get kind of excited. So then it's like this shared experience where they're getting to hear and learn more about their teammates. because of the music that's put on and how they react to it. And vice versa, like they get to share some of their culture, their background, their experience. So like they're putting on certain music that like is important or meaningful to them. And then you get to have conversations, you sort of get to talk. So that one really interests me. I was like, oh, that's, you know, I feel like that happens a lot, but we don't necessarily think about it being like, I'm going to play you a song because I want to tell you about, you know, where I grew up or like where I'm from, or, but it sort of happens by default because we're just trying to like get into a certain mood or a certain mindset that then we end up getting to share with others. So that one really surprised me, and I was like, that's really cool.
In baseball, a sport famous for transcending language barriers, music vibes unite off the field as well. One player interviewed spoke to a specific playlist that cut between high-tempo Spanish and English songs, melding the two cultures. Individual music and team music, both player-selected, also differed from music played in arena. This music, normally selected for promotional reasons or universally tied to the sport, as with Take Me Out to the Ball Game, were out of the player's control and generally more family-friendly. One player recognized that he'd been using this music as a mental cue to regulate his emotions between innings, while others stated that the intra-inning music distracted them. The intersection of stadium music and individual music implementation is the walk-up song. The unique integration of personalized walk-up songs in baseball is what initially intrigued Swary. Study participants expressed high intentionality with their choices, as well as the specific timing of their selections. One pitcher noted that his song choice elicited confidence for his walk to the mound. A position player used his song to directly regulate his emotions. The latter player was able to complete an imagery and breathing exercise during his walk-up song that he attributed to a positive, consistent mindset during at-bats. Kara Georges' aforementioned research corroborated the potential for positive music implementation in imagery scripts. Another player admitted he didn't really care about his walk-up song and had chosen it specifically to elicit positive fan engagement, like cheering, singing along, and dancing. He said that fans on social media heard his song and engaged with he and his personality directly because they enjoyed his vibes. Few of the players switched walk-up songs within seasons. Some participants did opt to alter their walk-up songs, citing slumps and batting average as determinants for change. Baseball is one of sports' most superstitious games, and walk-up songs allow players an opportunity to track emotional regulation peaks and valleys throughout hundreds of at-bats. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless of if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human in this world going through a hard time, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a positive way. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. This is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options just in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. If this sounds like something that could help you, there's a link in the show notes to get you started on your therapy journey. It's betterhelp.com/closer-mentality. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. Because finding a therapist is a little like dating. If you don't really fit with the therapist matched with you, it's easy and free to switch therapists without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/closer-mentality. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/closer-mentality. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this channel. Did you know that you can purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore? With Libro FM, you can pick from more than 325,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from real booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, you know the name. But you'll be part of a different story. one that supports your local community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to squeeze more reading into your busy life. Listen with the free Libro FM app while you do chores, walk the dog, or relax at home. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations from the people who know best, booksellers. Closer Mentality has partnered with Libro FM on a special offer. Through the link in the show notes, you can get 2 audiobooks on Libro FM for the price of 1. Offer only valid for new members in Canada and the US. Thanks to Libro FM for sponsoring this podcast. Dr. Swary's first job post-graduation was as the coordinator of sport and performance psychology at Oakland University. The position, as well as the department itself, was formed out of the increased post-COVID mental health dialogue. Dr. Swary suddenly had no rules, but also no roadmap.
It was wild. I mean, usually, like, when I'm going into places with like a new position, I just think of it as like trial and error. So kind of like with my older brother, it was kind of like if someone they'll tell me if I'm doing something wrong, but if nobody's telling me anything's wrong, then I'm just going to do what I feel like is best based on my training and my experience, and we'll make adjustments if people want adjustments to be made. But with that, it was like, I mean, I don't know. There's never been anyone in this role, and there's no practices or anything happening. So, like, I don't really know how often I should be in contact with these teams. I don't really know any of these coaches. So some, coaches tend to be not super strict barriers with others, but they're not necessarily going to invite this random new person in to come to these like Zoom meetings that are just meant to like keep them in contact with one another. So for me, it was a lot of like, I'm just going to reach out and try to build relationships, to offer to be around as much as I can. And my position was split between the counseling center and athletic department. So I was like 50-50. So I ended up with a lot of like clients and stuff, which I would get sent sort of the student athletes most of the time anyway. So that helped me with building relationships. The word of mouth from teammates is the best way to build relationships on teams, I think. So like, as I was working with some athletes and they were sharing with teammates like, oh no, I met him. He's not that terrible. That's the best way for me to get buy-in from other teams. And so there's a lot of just like, hey, when you are around, like, can I come to a practice once things are back up and running? Just reaching out, checking in on people. I make it an emphasis to build relationships with athletic trainers. I think they, partially because of Julie, my experience with my athletic trainer, but from that, I also realized how much athletic trainers know about the players and the team dynamics. I would argue that athletic trainers know more than coaches about players and team dynamics, because athletic trainers hear everything. I mean, you're kind of at your most vulnerable if you're hurt or you're on the table or you're on the sidelines. So they are like kind of the first responders when it comes to like mental health experiences and their frustrations. So I was like, I'm going to make sure that I spend time chatting with the athletic trainers and going to their meetings and getting to know the sports medicine staff, because that's where I'm going to get the best insights on team dynamics, because coaches will kind of see at times what the players want them to see. They're not necessarily going to be as open and honest with them as they are with an athletic trainer who doesn't have a say over their playing time or their scholarship or anything. So it was a lot of just kind of trial and error and see where can I be helpful and what can we make this look like? And then a lot of like prep work. So I'm like, once we are back, I want to make sure that I have like handouts designed that I can like send along. So I was doing that with teams. I'm like, hey, here's like some quick tips on, dealing with anxiety, some strategies for like, if you're, feeling stuck at home, like ways to keep busy. And then, I wanted to prep stuff for like some performance work for when we were back, that I would have, I had a little bit of less interaction. Like, well, if normally I'd be at practice, so I might as well like design this so that I don't have to try to do it later when I am going to practices and stuff. So yeah, it was crazy. It was just do what I can and wait till someone tells me I'm doing it wrong.
He recognized that the college athletes in the post-COVID landscape were increasingly unsure of how to build relationships and interact with teammates. This became a great example of the role music could play in bolstering positive team dynamics.
I think they had to be more aware of like being intentional about a lot of stuff. Um, and I think it kind of depended when they were coming in. So I think for the ones that were like freshmen when COVID hit, very different experience. Or like seniors in high school and then coming in, like versus the ones who were maybe on their junior or senior year. Because those ones, it was for those athletes, it was more of a loss, I would say, where like they were already close with a lot of people. They were now it was like sort of we were taking some experiences away. Whereas like some of the freshmen and people that were just coming in, it wasn't necessarily the same. It was more of like I didn't really get to build these relationships in the same way. So then when they are back on campus, they were like, oh, like this is so cool. I get to see them every day. Like I actually get to be around them and stuff. So I think it was sort of that like the ones that were coming in post COVID, they were more aware of like how important that time around each other is. Um, I think the ones who had it taken away got to realize that, but then they were on their way out anyway. So, yeah.
Through his career thus far at Oakland University and in healthcare, he implements 3 different sports psychology frameworks with his athletes. Dr. Swary gave a nod to music as helping athletes understand each principle of emotional regulation.
ACT is an acronym for acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT is what we might consider a third wave therapy. So it's similar to CBT, but it infuses some like mindfulness and meditation practices. So CBT, acronym for cognitive behavioral therapy, is really focused on identifying sort of desired and undesired behaviors, thoughts, and emotions, and working on making changes to increase desired behaviors, thoughts, and emotions, and decrease unwanted thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. ACT uses some of the same strategies, but the main focus is not to change thoughts, emotions, or to behaviors, but not necessarily thoughts and emotions. ACT really comes from a place of accepting thoughts and emotions, taking away some of the judgments of emotions or experiences being good or bad, more so changing our relationship with them. So I can feel anxious and still perform well, whereas CBT would take the approach more so of I reduce my anxiety in order to perform well. So again, the overlap is really about some of the techniques. So sort of half of ACT is really about sort of identifying our values, committing to acting in accordance to those, so about our behaviors. And then the other half is more about that idea of accepting, recognizing my conceptualization of myself and where I'm trying to hold maybe too tightly or trying to sort of live through this definition, and working more on just letting go of that and being more engaged with the present moment. So CBT, we're really working more on using certain strategies to help us reduce these unwanted emotions. So we are kind of taking the approach of good or bad or positive or negative, thinking about how they're impacting our life. Motivational interviewing is trans theoretical, so it's not really necessarily tied to any particular theories, but it's more a framework for working with our clients or our patients, however you want to call them. And motivational interviewing is really helping the individual that you're working with identify their own reasons for making a change. So rather than me telling them, they should do this or, this would be good for them, it's helping them figure out why they want to make a change and what's important to them. Because that, in my mind, and I think the research is pretty solid in showing that tends to make for better and more lasting behavior change. So it's more of a style of conducting sessions where we're working on identifying their reasons through some of the language that they use and asking questions in a certain way that elicits their own motivations rather than me trying to tell them that it's good for them, because sometimes that works, but not always. ACT, I would consider sort of my primary theoretical orientation. And then I draw from CBT more so from some of the strategies and tools that they have, because there are some really, really good strategies when it comes to managing certain physical symptoms and being able to help us with that behavior change. And then motivational interviewing, again, is a way of, I think about it more so in terms of how I conduct my sessions and how I lead in terms of trying to figure out why it's important to them rather than just sort of it being a good thing for them.
Are you an athlete rehabbing from an injury? Are you a coach or athletic trainer seeking additional support for your injured athlete toolkits? KT Tape has exactly what you need. KT Tape is a rehabilitation tape that helps stabilize and compress sensitive areas of the body during exercise. Apply KT Tape to an area either in pain or in recovery and feel the difference. KT Tape is comfortable, stable, and long-wearing. There's tape for all modes of action, from gentle, which is safe for easy activity and everyday use, to pro extreme, for athletes in moderate to high-impact exercise. KT Tape makes water-resistant tape as well for a more adaptable rehabilitation implementation. KT Tape caters to lifelong athletes and focuses on reducing muscle soreness for all users when worn during exercise and up to 48 hours post. Are you an athlete in need of prescription sports goggles or sunglasses? Today's final sponsor may have just the solution for you. A Site for Sport Eyes was created when founder Shannon Knight saw a niche that was perpetually going unfulfilled. A Site for Sport Eyes grew out of a need for education surrounding the impact of sport-related eye injuries and their lasting repercussions. A Site for Sport Eyes runs like a regular optical practice, not an e-commerce store. Their goal is to give you the same high-quality service and name-brand lenses made by the best optical laboratories in the country, geared specifically for athletes and athletic use cases. If you need new lenses or frames, A Site for Sport Eyes is the perfect place to get them. The links to BetterHelp.com, Libro FM, KT Tape, and A Site for Sport Eyes are all in the show notes. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Sometimes I think ACT ends up being one of the best and most effective for athletes because they're very used to a lot of control, and sort of in ACT, control is the problem. A lot of times we try to control things that we can't control. And so ACT tends to connect with them because it forces them to think about things in a little bit of a different way. CBT, I think, is really good for the people who have a hard time kind of getting out of that approach of changing relationships and letting go of control. Those people are just, they're not going to want to deal with me. Right? If I'm yeah, but maybe anxiety is okay. And they're no, I need to get rid of my anxiety. So I usually start with ACT. I think that connects with most, but for the people that they're just really not ready for that idea, or they're looking for a little bit quicker changes, I think CBT tends to be more effective just because we can do really concrete, quick skills that they can kind of take and go. And motivational interviewing tends to be most important when a client is really not necessarily super invested themselves, whether it's because a coach has made them come or it's just kind of something that they thought would be helpful, but they're not really sure why. Then it tends to be most helpful because it helps them buy in a little bit more rather than it being one of those external sources or motivations gets them really invested from their own perspective.
If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Swary's dissertation, the research referenced, or sports psychology principles, I've linked pertinent information and studies in the show notes. Thank you so much to Dr. Swary for joining episode 122 of Closer Mentality. You can watch he and I's full interview at the Closer Mentality Uncensored YouTube channel. The link to that is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another awesome story, but for today, I'm your host, Julia Mellett. See you in August.